Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. On today's episode, we're spanning the globe to bring you the latest. Conor McGregor lost a civil lawsuit in Dublin. 6 titles and $6 million are at stake in Riyadh. And Petr Yan is back. We'll tell you about what he did out in Macau. Hello, everyone. Gorgeous George here on the con. And look at the distinguished panel we have for you today. The MMA media titan, Mike Bond, checks in from Toronto, Canada. Our fight analyst, Dan Tom, is back. He's here in Las Vegas. And the Boston shot caller returns to SBC. He's out in Beantown. Cold Coffee's going to handle the ones and twos. Let's get going. Holy cow, did you guys see what happened in Macau? Petr Yan just outclassed Deiveson Figueiredo across 25 minutes of face punching. 50-45s across the board, and now he wants another crack at Merab Dvalishvili. Mike, kick things off. Let's talk about the big card in Macau.
Yeah, Petr Yan, so impressive in this fight, man. Really just a vintage performance, even better than vintage, maybe in the minds of some. If you look at the fact that he came off an ACL surgery, a layoff into this fight, it didn't look like he missed a beat at all against Deiveson Figueiredo in there. Yeah, Figueiredo had a couple good moments, but Yan, the way he was putting it together, that trip he had late in the second round, the combinations, just everything he was doing in there was unreal, showed that he is still very much an elite bantamweight. And man, even during his rough times, that weird losing streak he had, I never sold my stock in Petr Yan. He has been unreal in my mind forever, and this was a performance that validated. If anyone's selling their Petr Yan stock out there, I will gobble it up. So impressed, man. He's the truth, and I can't wait to see him in a very, very significant fight at bantamweight after this.
I noticed you said significant. The title shot, it's going to be tough.
I think we still got to go with Umar, right? He's been promised it. He's been told, like, I would like to see that fight. There's that heat with Merab there that just continues to grow. For me, that's the fight you got to do, but he's right there after it. I mean, it's hard to be like, jump the queue for a guy who's undefeated and has a nice win over Corey Sandhagen recently, for a guy who, for better or worse, a year and a half ago did get 50-45 by Merab Dvalishvili. So I think a little work to do before you get to that rematch. Agreed,
but we always hear people making the case for other fighters. In fact, there's one in the chat room. Mark England says, give Yan the Sugar Show rematch. Sorry, I misinterpreted. I thought he wanted the Sugar Show rematch.
That's a rematch I'm down for sure.
Merab. Yeah. I like it as well. And folks, you can be a part of the show by chiming in here through Facebook, like Bilal Marwat is doing, or through YouTube, obviously. And the best ones get on the show. Nolan, your reaction, man, to what happened in Macau at the top of the bill. Petr Yan defeating Deiveson Figueiredo.
Yeah, I mean, Mike kind of touched on it there, all the bases, but he looked fantastic. I mean, that was a really fight that I think a lot of us were looking forward to. Really, 2 high-level competitors at bantamweight. It was so fun to watch too. Like, shout out to Figueiredo. I'm still very interested to see where he goes at bantamweight from here. But Petr Yan reinstilled himself in that conversation. I don't think it will be a title fight next. Obviously, like Bond said, same thing. Umar is next. That's the fight to make. Now, will the schedules align with Ramadan, everything else? There's some, Merab's obviously saying what he's saying online. I don't see the path for Petr right now. Like, I don't see it being an immediate shot, but there is certainly a path. So, one more fight. I like the O'Malley rematch that you mentioned, George. I think that makes a lot of sense depending on Sean's timeline as well. But bantamweight just continues to be fun, and it was great to see a guy like Yan get back in the mix, because I think even though he has some losses, he's a guy that always seems to take one step forward and move. Take one step backward and move 2 steps forward.
Nolan, who are the Muslim fighters that observe the religious holidays? I know you're talking about Umar Nurmagomedov right now, but what about Merab Dvalishvili or Petr Yan? Do you know about them, or were you referencing them as well, lumping them?
No, I don't think either of them. I could be wrong, but I don't think either of them celebrated. I think they're both okay. They're not. Either of them are Muslim, but yeah, the Umar situation is really. I think what it comes down to is, with that coming up, I think, the UFC kind of was interested in maybe booking that fight in January and even in December at one point. And so now that kind of leaves February, which is the Sydney card, right? And then March, I believe, is when it starts to go into Ramadan. So I think Merab wanted like a normal period of time off. He wanted like March or so. And then obviously Umar wants to sneak in that fight before Ramadan begins.
Right.
Otherwise, you're looking at June or something, July, when you throw in the preparation as well. So I think that's kind of where this contention is brewing from, and why Merab's kind of throwing these other names out there, is that I don't think he wants to be put into this, like, you have to fight Umar by our deadline, has to be in, fly across the world and get taxed up the rear end in Sydney to take this fight or whatever. So, and I think too, also, he's probably learned from his teammate, Aljamain Sterling too, about kind of getting, put in a situation where you make a quick turnaround when you're not really feeling it. So we'll see what happens. Like, I'm not saying February's out of the picture, but I think that's kind of the line that's being drawn here, and where there's maybe some difficulty in booking that fight.
All right. Now, Tom, you booked this fight unofficially a few years ago. Did it live up to, on your end? Did you enjoy it?
Man, I've been booking this fight, I want to say since 2018, but the earliest tweet I could find was, only over a half decade ago, folks, in early 2019. But this is why people Figueiredo didn't even have the title back then. Figueiredo's a flyweight. No, he's not. He is a bantamweight. He has proven that, and both these guys have proven why I've been calling for this matchup, why fresh matchups, when you base it off stylistic affairs, you can't go wrong. I hate when you guys bring up a good point about a rematch, because I'm so sick of rematches. All we've been getting since the pandemic is Dana White pulling the e-brake up to the kids, going, "All right, losers, get in. We got Contender Series, middleweights, and rematches." Like, I feel like that's all we've been getting for like the last 2 or 3 years here, folks. Seriously, look at it. There's a rematch literally booked on every card. Even like lower level WMMA stuck on the prelims. Like, hey, these two fought like in the regionals, not even in Invicta. Let's go ahead and run that back. Stop with the rematches. This fight was great. Fresh matchups. And I will say, because it'll tag us going forward, this fight in the co-main event was like, props to Mike Bond and others for smartly not selling their stock right with Petr Yan, because like 4 of those losses, like, are arguably not even losses for Petr Yan if you go look back at it. Like, it's only his fight to Merab Dvalishvili did this guy really lose, where, not to jump ahead in the co-main event, there's a fighter that arguably could and should be on an 0-4 losing streak, and probably she showed why. So records can be deceiving, folks. So smart move on you, Mr. Bond, for not selling that stock.
All right, and just to be clear, you don't want to see Figueiredo go back down and fight Moreno a 5th time. It seems like you're not a fan of rematches.
Please no.
All right.
We already sold his prime. We already gave away this guy's prime fighting Moreno. Like, I'm surprised he put up as good of a fight as he did, right? It was amazing. Props to Figueiredo, by the way.
It breaks these guys mentally more than maybe even physically, just the same person, the same bullseye. Props to Petr Yan. He's looked great these last 2 fights. You can tell he's gotten better, and he knew he needed to, because some big tough fights await him, but it doesn't look like it's going to be the title fight next for him. But with Figueiredo, what do we do with him, Mike Bond? This is your wheelhouse here on Sundays. What's next for the stars from the previous night's card? If you put yourself in the shoes of a Maynard or a Shelby out in the UFC matchmaking offices.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing for him, right, is that even though this was a high-profile main event and all that stuff, he's still very fresh in the bantamweight division. Only 4 fights in. Yeah, he's already fought, 2 former champs and some top contenders, but still an abundance of fresh faces for him too. So you can't really go wrong if you want to do anything. You could do the Corey Sandhagen fight if he doesn't end up getting Sean O'Malley. You could do like a Mario Bautista. You could do Kyler Phillips, any of these guys kind of on the lower end of the rankings right now, and give him a chance to bounce back. And he restarts the climb. He said in this post-fight interview, "I always come back stronger." So I think he'll have the chance to represent that. And I think this would be good for him. A setback, but I don't think we write Deiveson Figueiredo off as someone who can be a contender at bantamweight.
You like those options, Nolan? You got one for yourself there you want to share with us?
No, I mean, I think those were good. I think that's pretty much. I think it's pretty clear right now at the top of the division. Like, again, timeline I think is going to be a big part of this. Like, when is O'Malley back from his injury? When does this title fight take place? So maybe there would be some sort of booking that's kind of out of bounds. But I think that the way that things are laid out right now is pretty clear. Like, what the next title fight should be and what the next number 1 contender fight should be.
Well, just remember, according to matchmakers John Anik and Ali Abdelaziz, it looks like Cejudo and Cruz might be colliding at some point. So leave those 2 out of it. I like the Batista matchup. I don't like winner versus loser, meaning coming off the previous fights. But Batista, his stock didn't jump like it should have off a win over Aldo, maybe facing Figueiredo. might make sense. Good stuff there. All right, so let me ask you this: has Jan shown you guys, can he be a world champion again? Dan Thomas, it's not as easy as people think.
It is tough, especially in that division. It's really tough. His transition game is so awesome, but the transitions are typically controlled by the wrestling. And Merab Dvalishvili, we didn't, like you guys just brought up. I was there live for that fight. We didn't see that long ago. We're talking about Petr Yan versus Merab Dvalishvili, right? So that's kind of the hard stop for me. And of course, hashtag Umar is coming. I mean, this guy's like Omar from The Wire. You know what I'm saying? Like, pave the way. We still got to see what this guy does, right? And we're still, ironically enough, still finding out about Umar, even though he just had finally, a 5-round fight. We still haven't seen him in a title fight, but he's there. So yes, still more to see for me.
Dan, was that Figueiredo fight with Jan in the small cage? Do you recall? At the Virgin?
I believe that was wow. That's a good question. I believe it was a regulation size, but it could have been. But they haven't been taking the small cage in like I want to say like over half a decade. I feel like we haven't seen it outside of the Apex or the where Merab Dvalishvili and Petr Yan at the Virgin hotels here, which we've had like one of those since the pandemic, right, guys? So we really haven't seen that small cage. Correct me if I'm wrong, Nolan or Mike, anybody, but we haven't seen that in a minute.
Yeah, I didn't recall off the top of my head. I was just wondering if maybe that looks like a slightly different fight in a bigger cage with Petr Yan having more room to operate. I'm sure he would be more competitive, but in my mind, I feel like Jan versus Umar would maybe be the trickier fight for Umar between him and Merab. So I don't know. They're all good.
And Mike, I want to stay with you on something here. A lot of times a former champ, the road back isn't easy. I stated that, but he's got to go through these guys that are just grinders, wrestlers, endless cardio. But I think where Petr Yan has really, really shined is not just his physical abilities, mentally. It really looks like if you shove him into these fights, he's going to be competitive. And great point about the octagon, because if he's fighting in title fights, that is 33% more real estate.
Yeah, I mean, dude, he got 49 takedowns shot on him, a single fight record by Merab in that first fight. Defended 38 of them, got taken down 11 times. Wow. But it's not like he took a ton of damage there. Like, you could maybe see an avenue to maybe he lands something on one of those takedown attempts. He'd be more ready for it, all that kind of stuff. So I think a rematch would go differently. I don't know if I would pick Petr Yan to win, but it would be, I think, a very compelling fight again. And bantamweight, you can't go wrong. I mean, trying to reclaim the title in any division is tough. This weight class is absolutely a shark tank, so it's going to be tricky for anyone to get back there.
You got to repeat that one more time. You weren't bullshitting. He attempted 48 takedowns. Is that what you said?
49 takedowns. 49
takedowns. And he defended. Wow. That's pretty amazing, man. All the way around. How many attempts? How many were defended? That's crazy. All right. I did not know that stat. Listen, from the rest of the card, it wasn't the sexiest one ever, but there was some names there and some people performed. Let's put a spotlight on them. Nolan King, who would you like to put a spotlight from UFC Macau?
Got to give a shout out to Gabriela Fernandez. I mean, going in there, talk about a scenario that just seemed like she was being set up, right? From start to finish, going in there against one of the top rising, hyped up women's prospects in the UFC, a fighter with a tremendous kickboxing background of experience, even though she's new in MMA and in Kong Wong. So pretty excellent performance to go out there in enemy territory, to kind of shrug off the weigh-in antics with the Joker and all the perform acting that was going on there, and just to go in there and just be a savage and get a club and sub submission as a big underdog in enemy territory. So shout out to her. She did great building her brand, and we'll see where Kong goes from here.
How about you, Dan? Who you want to put a spotlight on from that card?
I'm going to tail Nolan a bit and shout out another road Brazilian, right? Shout out to the road Brazilians, by the way. They're the ones getting flown to Russia and Asia, whether it's by big companies like UFC or regional companies, for a reason, folks. Like, shout out to them Brazilians. I'm going to shout out Nicolas Mota. This guy barely had any money to train, barely a pot to pee in. George, I know you and Goes have interviewed this guy before. He's now, a Las Vegas backyarder and Tringator. There's some bias there. Sure, he also trained at the other gym I trained at this year, which was Bangtown Muay Thai. Now, Nick came right as I was leaving, so I just missed him there. But I thought, for a guy with a boxing game to round out his game, there's probably like 2 no better gyms. Get the range, Muay Thai striking at Bang Tao. You got the cage wrestling and grappling at Extreme. And the odds makers keep making this guy giant underdogs for those paying attention. And he's coming out and starting to win a lot of these fights. So shout out to Nicholas Mota, man.
Yeah, I want to give a quick shout out to Muslim Salikov. He's 40 years of age now. And that spinning wheel kick to the head was beautiful. Now, listen, this is a guy that took some losses to Nicholas Dalby, Randy Brown, Li Jingliang. And I think everybody was like, all right, he's either going to finish out the contract or that UFC bot's going to recognize and punt him, right? No, man, this guy is not giving up on himself. He's come back. He sticks to his game plan. He's got a lot, an arsenal of kicks, and he put one on him, man. So he's got back-to-back wins now over Kenan Song and Santiago Ponzinibbio. All right, Mike Bond, finish off this segment. How about you? Who do you want to put a spotlight on?
Yeah, that spinning wheel kick was amazing. Just a statistical note, the first fighter in UFC history to have multiple spinning wheel kick knockouts to the head. So big credit there. A little bit of history for Salikov, I think at 40 years old. I'm going to go with another head kick, but it was on the female side. Ming Shi, man, that was a terrifying knockout she had. Put her opponent in the hospital. Wow. Carried out on a stretcher. You don't see that, too often anymore. That was pretty scary, especially sitting there at like whatever time it was, 4 a.m. my time. Not sure if I knew what was going on for real, but yeah, that was devastating. And then you see all the aftermath. This woman is a full-time doctor in China. Her parents don't even know she's a mixed martial arts fighter in this form. They think she's at competitions, karate chopping boards and stuff. And then she goes out there and lands, one of the most devastating knockouts in strawweight history. And then is just very graceful on the microphone, but with a slightly terrifying tone in some of her comments too. So this was the real deal, the full package from her, and very interesting addition to strawweight. See what she's capable of, because that was a nasty, nasty knockout.
Amazing to hide a whole second career from your family. That's crazy. And do we have an update on the other young lady by any chance? Has anyone heard anything?
They gave some throughout the broadcast. I mean, and we can follow up maybe today, but it sounded like, she was fully responsive and had family with her, and, everything was more or less good to go, but they'll hold her for as long as they need to until they feel fully confident in where she's at physically.
All right, folks, again, you can help out the show, help out the channel, hitting the like button, subscribing. It's free content for you. All you got to do is this and that. Like and subscribe. We'll take care of the rest, especially if you're a hardcore MMA fan like us. We catch up with everyone, man. We're at the events. We catch up with these fighters. We give some love to the young up-and-coming talent. So please help us out. Your support means a ton. Over on the chat, Mark England, give a shout out to him. Josh Hart, he wants Figgy versus Jose Aldo next. Tony Brooks, big shout out to him. John, Steve Williams, Joseph Boza, JK, thank you all for chiming in. I will get to some of the specifics in just a sec, but let's get to this one. This one, I don't like doing this segment, man, but it's the real world, and some stuff went down on the other side of the pond. Let's just get straight to it. As many of you have heard, Conor McGregor was found liable for a 2018 sexual assault in Dublin, Ireland. We've covered this story on MMA Junkie, and I encourage you to go read it. In short, after the trial that took about 2 weeks, a jury returned a verdict that includes awarding damages to a young lady named Nikita Hand, 250,000 euros, approximately. Hand is the young lady who claimed she was sexually assaulted. Nolan, let's hear from you first on this one. Not an easy one to tackle, but that's our job. Let's get to it.
Yeah, it was certainly, first of all, I want to say, a shout out to all the journalists over there that were in the courtroom. I think for a lot of us here, we weren't able to, get any sort of live stream or have access to it. So I think the coverage over there, they did a very excellent job of portraying what was going on in that courtroom. But yeah, for about 2 weeks, this was going on, this civil suit. I know we had heard about it a couple of years ago. There was some rumblings, some rumors that there was an Irish sports star that was going to get, that had been accused of sexual assault. We didn't really know who it was. There was some speculation it might be Conor. And then ultimately a New York Times report comes out that says, hey, it was him. This woman's going to sue him civilly. She's looking for this. I think since then, maybe there's been so much that's gone on with Conor McGregor, right? There's been all sorts of accusations. There was the thing that happened at the Miami Heat game. There was something that happened on a boat. There's been all sorts of stuff, right? I don't think I need to bring everybody through everything that Conor's, legal history is certainly out there for all that wants to punch it into Google. But since that time, I think that was whatever it was, 6 years ago or something. So it kind of fell back in people's brains. But more recently, when this date was approaching, I think more details were coming out, and then each day, being able to hear and through these journalists in Ireland, kind of what was going on in there. It was certainly, there was a lot of disturbing details. I think it seemed like a very emotional, high tension sort of setting with people on both sides, and the paparazzi and the attention that this was getting in Ireland. Conor speaking about this, for the first time, being cross-examined, the man that was also accused of this, that was not found liable, James Lawrence, him speaking about it publicly, Nikita Hand, the victim, getting up there and speaking about it emotionally. And then all the cross-examination that comes with it, right? All the evidence. There was, pictures of bruising on her, and some of the, hearing her details of her accounts of going to the hospital, and some of the medical professionals that treated her. There was CCTV surveillance footage of her with James Lawrence and McGregor in the hotel. And so the jury, heard a lot of different information at certain times. The judge asked everybody the jury to leave the courtroom so that he could talk to the two sides about what could be used as evidence, what couldn't be, what shouldn't be said. And then ultimately, before the day before the jury went into deliberations, or maybe the morning of the afternoon where they went to deliberations, the judge kind of spoke to them about the different things that he thinks they should take into account. And it wasn't specific details of like, I thought that this person had a good point or that person had a good point. But one of the things he was saying was he felt like people should, or the jury should lean on the evidence that didn't have any potential for bias. So that would be, the photographs of the injuries. That would be the CCTV surveillance footage. So ultimately, after about a day of deliberations or so, it wasn't typically too long, the 8 women and 4 men that were in the jury determined that McGregor was liable and that James Lawrence was not. Awarded Nikita Hand about $260,000 American. I believe it was like 250,000 euros. And ultimately, McGregor's come out and said that he's going to appeal this decision. I think there's a hearing next week about, how they're who's going to pay for what with legal fees and things. So this is still ongoing a little bit, but I think, like any sort of legal proceeding in the US, this is a big deal. This is a big decision. It's a big mark on Conor McGregor and his legacy, I think. There's been a lot of accusations, but there hasn't been really much that's gone to this level, right? So now, unless he appeals it and it gets overturned or whatever, I mean, this is going to be something that goes down as part of his story.
Yeah. And Joseph Boza in the chat, real quick, not that it's the most important thing of what we're discussing, but I made this mistake earlier. The equivalent is not 313,000. I think you might have done it according to pounds. And this jury's awarded the damages in euros. So what Nolan said is closer to, because the euro and the dollar, like I said, not that important. I don't know why I went down that road. Mike Bond, how about your thoughts, man? You've covered this guy pretty much from the beginning. I would almost say your careers kind of parallel a little bit. Your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, Nolan covered everything great there in terms of laying out the timeline and everything. Did a great job with us internally, kind of updating us each day on what was going on. So we were all following along pretty closely. But now that we're here, obviously, you just wonder how the dominoes are going to continue to fall or what that looks like, right? We had the Hitman video game where Conor was like a special downloadable character or something come out this morning and say that he's being pulled from like all content there. You wonder if that's just going to be it or if that's the tip of the iceberg with all these other brands that he has associated to his name. But of course, the big question is the biggest brand associated to his name, which is the Ultimate Fighting Championship, right? How are they going to act around this or respond? We reached out to the company for statements when the verdict was reached, have not got anything back on that regard. So I'm sure the next time maybe it does get heard of on something on their end is like Dana White will probably do some interviews in the lead up to the pay-per-view next week, UFC 310, and maybe he gets asked about that, but he's already said that Conor won't return until the back end of 2025. I'm not sure if this was a timeline set with this potential outcome already in mind. I struggle to see a world where the UFC just completely cuts ties with him, even though maybe you could make an argument. This is probably like the perfect time to do something like that if you want to send a statement to the public, to your roster, all that kind of stuff about what behaviors or situations may or may not be allowed. But we know Conor McGregor operates under a different set of rules, so we don't really know what's going to happen there. But going forward with like the appeal, Eric McGracken, who does great work like with legal stuff on X and in the MMA community, kind of stated he thinks it would be a bad idea to go forward with the appeal process, just because then you're rehashing this news cycle for a second, potentially third time. And if it doesn't go your way, that's even more damning on the situation. So it's going to be interesting to see how they proceed. Of course, you see Conor out there posting tweets about it, long tweets, long statement kind of things, and a lot of arguments to be made on whether that's a detriment or a benefit to his situation. So there's still a lot of moving parts here. Of course, as Nolan kind of said at the end there, the most important thing is this is the a stain on his legacy and kind of his brand that's hard to remove. Even if he was to win an appeal or something, it's hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube when it comes to something like this. People see the first set of headlines, they see, rapists, all these type of things, and they just kind of put that attachment in their mind forever. It's hard to put that back. So that's going to be the biggest thing he's dealing with going forward, because obviously this is not a criminal case. He's not facing jail time. The big out, $250,000, I imagine, is not a devastating blow to Conor McGregor's bottom line. So now it's a question of reputational damage, and I think that's the biggest thing he deals with going forward.
Mm-hmm. Dan, Tom, let's hear your reaction. Very disappointing for sure to get this news last week. What are your thoughts?
First off, sentiment what Nolan said. Shout out to everybody that's doing reporting on this and the good reporting as well. I think it's really going to be a litmus test building off of what Mike Bond just said, right? Because you're going to watch that, right? Like, I don't disagree with Mike, by the way. That's kind of where I see it, right? These two different kind of justice systems. And unfortunately, I don't really see it leaving too much of a stain as much as it should, which, by the way, if you want to remind yourself of humanity, just look at the comments of any of this coverage and you can kind of remind yourself the humanity that exists out there. But for what she's getting and having to go through this poor woman, like, man, it folks, it ain't worth it. Trust me, it ain't worth it. So shouts to her and her courage, shouts to the people covering it. But unfortunately, I don't know if it's going to be that much of a stain outside of Ireland, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Irish folks, but Conor doesn't have as bright of a reputation there even before this stuff, right? Now that it's actually getting confirmed, you do wonder what will happen there. But if you look at, everybody from the UFC president, and not to get political, but it's apropos to the president of the United States, like, you could do some really awful stuff to women or otherwise, and sadly, it's not going to affect your position. So I would just look at it more like a litmus test, almost like what Mike was saying. You're going to be able to see how different people are reacting to this. And one last thing, guys, I'm not even a big video game guy, but Mike brought it up. I thought it was interesting because I'm not a big video game guy, but one of the few video games I will dabble on is Hitman. And I may or may not have went on last night / the wee hours this morning. And they still got advertisements, and they call Conor, by the way, the Disruptor. They keep the Reebok fight kit, the tattoos, everything. And they just call him the Disruptor. And it just says, the Disruptor is coming. And I'm like, first of all, phrasing, guys, not really sensitive to what's going on. But no, secondly, well, they haven't pulled him yet. I'm keeping my eye out for that too. Are they, if, when, right? Not that I'm some pearl clutcher, but I mean, come on, guys, can we at least take down the Conor McGregor is coming over the headline? That's easy. Yeah. That's all I got.
Speaking of come in the chat room says Mike Tyson raped a woman and went to prison for it, and Dana still worships him. And I was thinking of something, because the next question would be to this panel, right? Legacy and how will this affect him? But it is true. Mike Tyson, in a criminal case, was found guilty, did time about 30 years ago. And since then came out, boxed again in not his prime years. I think he lost some of that, but still was in some high profile matchups. Then did some movies, now a successful podcaster. You see what he did recently at the age of 58, and he's beloved. So guys, real quick, the legacy thing, Is this just something that hurts him now, but in the end, we'll all remember the impact he had on our sport? Or do you think this is just different times and maybe this one will carry longer? Let's start with Mike.
Yeah, it's different times. It's too soon to tell, I think, to be honest with there. Like if Conor goes the rest of his life without another situation similar or like in the same sphere, yeah, maybe the road to kind of eroding what this meant for your name and your brand is possible. But that was a long road for Mike Tyson, man. Like he did, as you kind of listed a lot of stuff there, felt like kind of the Hangover was maybe like a turning point for him. He had his one-man show for a while there. There's a lot of stuff he did that went into like his rehabilitation process. And that was also in a different world, right? That was pre-social media, pre all the stuff that we have now that kind of gives a lot more people opinions and ways of looking at things or framing things. So definitely a different world, but obviously I wasn't there when the Mike Tyson like verdict came down and how people reacted in the immediate aftermath and what it was like. But you kind of see this there. And as Dan said, maybe it doesn't seem already like it's doing the worst for him. I don't know. Like UFC hasn't even commented on this situation. And technically, they have a very tough branding on Conor right now in his name. So I think it's possible, but I think they're kind of at two different starting points with their situation too.
I think Mike covered it well. Nolan, if you want to chime in, that's fine. But I also want you to address, does this even dampen the interest in a return of Conor McGregor?
Yeah, I mean, that last question is something that can always be debated, right? I mean, when somebody's name, I think for a lot of people it does. But again, like the fact that there's so many moving parts, right? Like, will we ever see Conor fight again? Is like keeps coming to my brain too. Forgetting about the UFC, but I think there'll obviously be a lot of attention, whether or not things that are awful in life bring more attention than they should. I think we've all seen that with social media and stuff. Sometimes it's not necessarily about who deserves the most attention, but it's about who gets the most attention. So, I mean, he'll obviously, no matter till the day he dies, if he fights once, if he fights 10 more times, I think he'll always bring in giant amounts of eyeballs. I think that's just the reality of this all. But I do think Mike was saying, like, it is very hard to place how this incident will impact how we look at him 20 years from now, how the history books will write about him. But I do think the fact that there has been kind of this rise and fall and this sort of, character became a person, became somebody that seemed out of controls and a little off the rails. Like, this is kind of the pinnacle of that. I think this is like, the worst thing that's kind of happened or has been proven to happen or he's been, found liable of or whatever. So I think this fits that trend though. And I think that trend will, at this point in time, unless there's some sort of pivot to the right or the left, kind of to get off this road, I do think that his kind of erratic behavior in becoming this character that we thought was kind of an act, and now it seems like it's kind of gotten a little out of control. I do think that will be a big part of his story. How much will this specific incident weigh into everything? Who knows? And to be honest with you, I would love to be able to say that we aren't going to run into anything else legal related with Conor McGregor, any sort of controversy. I would love that. But only time will be able to tell if that's the way that things are going to play out or not. So I guess ask me this question in 20 years and I'll give you a good answer.
We're going to be friends in 20 years, just making sure, because every time I start that Boston banner. Yeah.
Hey man, you guys keep winning that in-season tournament. I'm not going to talk to you anymore.
Dodgers, baby. What about the Dodgers? All right. Listen, Fuzzy1Z says the majority of Irish folk don't like his wild behavior at all because they are some of the finest people on earth. I've heard that a lot before, that country is split on McGregor. A lot of people aren't fans of him at all, and then others obviously are. We obviously come and run in the circles of the ones that make it all the way to Vegas. And if you've made it this far, I imagine it's the cheer, not the protest. Dan, one last one for you. Is this, because you follow pop culture, some hoops, combat sports, this fall from grace, is this one of the biggest ones you've ever seen?
Again, it should be, between the amount of numbers of things, like Nolan said, we could have a whole segment just kind of reading his rap sheet, right? But let's not forget, guys, it wasn't just 1 year ago where someone else very popular in the space was on camera abusing a woman, his own wife. And we voted for that person to be man of the year that same year, this very space. So yeah, I am not holding my breath sadly for this to change too much of how people are going to, at least the majority of people are probably going to look at Conor.
Mm-hmm.
And
All
George,
right.
not to
Yeah.
jump in too much, but I just do want to give 2 shout outs. Paul Healy from the Irish Mirror, he gave detailed play-by-play of every day at the courtroom with times and everything. So if people are interested in supremely detailed, breakdowns of what happened, that's one person. And then Frank Greeny from the Irish Times did a great breakdown with Luke Thomas yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
He's been covering it as well for them. So I just want to give a shout out to those 2, because I think those were 2 people that really helped my understanding of not only what was going on, but what it meant as well.
Yeah. And word on the street is, for you YouTubers, 1.5 times is your friend. Thank you, Mike Bond, for that one. I forgot that one existed, and it's not a shot at those people that created the content. It's just long content, but you can get through it still. Go ahead, Mike. What were you gonna say?
No, I was just gonna say, definitely go watch that conversation with Luke. It's on his YouTube channel, and I think the big takeaways coming from that, from just kind of the perspective people have on Nikita Hammond, whether this was a money grab or one of those things. If she had lost this and they had ruled against her, she would have been culpable to pay all the legal fees for the entire thing, including Conor McGregor's side, which, from what they said in that conversation, could have got over €1 million, and she ended up getting 250K ish in that range. So if you feel the risk of losing this significantly outweighed the benefit of the win here, so I guess keep that in mind when discussing or thinking about the motives behind this.
I want to give a shout out to Instinct RT. Says Dan Tom saying some very real stuff. I like it because earlier Oatmeal 26 says had to throw a Trump jab in there. Listen, man, this is a serious discussion. We're trying our best to just give you all the different angles. We're not throwing jabs here or anything. This shaking my head thing, bro, you got to get over it, man. This is just a discussion, and that's that. I felt like it was apropos. We have to use the Kobe Bryants, the Mike Tysons, the predecessors in sports, in life, that have also, been down these types of legal problems. So please spare me that comment. All right, moving on. Let's talk about some of the latest MMA news. Dan, Tom, your thoughts on Hill versus Prochaska. It's booked for UFC 311. You like it? Both guys former champs trying to get back to some gold.
Yeah, I don't know if this one was like booked at one point in time, but I remember having my eye out for this matchup, thinking it was a real possibility. I'm sure they were right up there in the standings. I like it. I don't know how much I like it for Yuri offhand. He tends to get hit by a disproportionate amount of left-sided strikes. He's got the southpaw and Jamal Hill, but Hill's got some bouncing back to do as well. So we're going to see where his mental fortitude's at. I like the matchup though for light heavyweight.
Mm-hmm. Well, you did it really nice and quick. I like it. All right, Nolan and Mike, how about you guys? Hill and Prochaska. It's kind of a big fight, so I'll go around the horn. Nolan?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's like Dan said, it's almost kind of surprising that we haven't seen these 2 guys fight before, right? With the weirdness that light heavyweight division was in, when there was just people vacating left and right. So it's good to have some divisional flow back. And this is the fight to make. I think it's one that, who's not going to sign up to watch this, right? Like, it just has excitement written all over it. I think it's a great supporting act. If Islam and Arman is the headliner over there in the Intuit Dome in Inglewood, I think this is a great supporting act, either a co-main or third fight from the top, or even the UFC stacks it. Hell, let's go all 4 down for this. So great fight, great matchmaking, and no complaints from me.
Yeah, and we failed around the horn talking about Macau. We didn't even bring up Carlos Ulberg's name. Mm-hmm. He had a great performance, and he called out Khalil Roundtree. So I like the way, if that were to shape up like that, throw in this booking and throw in Magomed Ankalaev versus the champ Powhatan. Light heavyweight's getting pretty exciting. Did you like that matchup, Mike?
Yeah, it was good. I think it was the right fight to make. These 2 have kind of been circling each other for a while. I think the one Dan was alluding to there, they did like a face-off in the crowd at an event. I think when Yuri was the champion before he suffered his injury that forced him to vacate, and led to that whole crapshoot of Jamal Hill ultimately ending up with the title. So yeah, this makes a lot of sense. 2 guys who have lost to Alex Pereira, who are on the comeback trail. We'll see what they can do. Probably going to be an absolute banger. I wouldn't expect many takedown attempts in this fight. So yeah, it'll be fun.
Yeah. Sky V's and El Daddy says, I like it. Former champs that had to give up the belt due to injury, and both fought Glover for it. That's right. Exactly. And I mentioned matchmakers Anik and Abdelaziz earlier. So let's talk about this. Cruz and Cejudo. Is it a rematch that needs to be reheated? Should the UFC rebook it? Mike, back to you. They tangled on social media just
no, I
I
saw
know you know.
that. I don't know. If we were doing one more fight with Dominic Cruz, man, you're going to be really hard pressed to convince me it should be anyone other than Jose Aldo. Like, if this is our final chance to do this, you got to pull the trigger on it. We already saw the fight between Cejudo and Dom Cruz. There was a title on the line. There's no reason for them to do that right now, especially if Cejudo's alluding to in an interview he did with Nolan a couple months ago that he might be headed back down to flyweight. It seems he still gets pulled in the direction of these bantamweights because they all want to fight him and he'll hype the fight. But yeah, it's got to be, if you have one more with Dominic Cruz, I don't want to see a rematch. I want to see the fight with Jose Aldo. But if he's going to do multiple more, sure, I guess that's fine. But if we got a last dance for Dom, anyone but Jose Aldo, I think, will disappoint the entire MMA community.
I would agree with that. Nolan, I will ask, though, if that doesn't happen, because it hasn't happened. Hell, I thought Aldo versus Cruz would have made sense in Utah recently. Instead, it was Mario Batista. These guys have history. I guess they wrestled in the same state, right? And so they've kind of been interstate rivals. They have had the fight before. And then, man, they really had a good exchange on Twitter. Starting with John Anik, I think just throwing it in the universe that he would really like to see something like that. And all of a sudden, these guys were coming at each other. But what are your thoughts here?
I'm only going to watch that fight if Keith Peterson refs it again. That's my only condition. No, it's okay. Like, it's not the worst one. I do think Mike's just spot on. I mean, talk about being able to see two legends that are kind of towards the end of their career. I guess, all those still got some in the tank. We don't really know what Dom's up to because he doesn't really fight. I'm so much more about that. I mean, the Cejudo thing, I guess it kind of ended controversially, but I thought Henry, like, all things considered, even though his layoff, he looked halfway decent against Merab. Like, he wasn't, one of these guys where we say, oh, like those years, man, he's just towards the end. Like, I think he's somebody that can still compete, with pretty much anybody in that division. So I kind of think they're in a little bit of a different spot right now. And the other one people brought up in my comments a lot when I tweeted something about I'd rather see Aldo and Cruz fight was actually running it back with Garbrandt, which there's a little bit of heat there. I think those two guys are maybe at more of a similar point in terms of where they are in the division, which is like kind of, we'd have no idea where they are. So that would be the other one that I'd maybe entertain. But although Cruz is just such an easy answer, I feel silly entertaining anything else.
I forgot about that. Garbrandt and Cruz.
Yeah.
That was some good stuff, man. Cigarettes and alcohol. 3 a.m. is saying in the chat. That's right. He smelled like cigarettes and beer. That was Cruz's remark. Dan, I think we've heard enough about this one. Let's talk about Nick Diaz, man. He's off 310. It's Vicente Luque against Garimbo. I hope I said that right. What are your thoughts here, man? We talked earlier about McGregor and the UFC. What's going to happen there? What do you think should happen here? It's a different thing that's going on. Different demons this guy's fighting. I honestly, I think I just want them to part ways.
Yeah, I do too as well. But I honestly don't even think that should have been booked, that fight. I don't know if Nick Diaz should be booked. I don't even know if Vicente Luque should be booked. Like, let's book Themba Garimbo with someone else, because Luque worries me, man, with the brain, the brain bleed damage and all that stuff. Like, yeah, man, I'm not excited for any matchup with him involved, much less whatever reasoning they have for digging up Nick Diaz. What are we doing here, folks?
Yeah,
I don't know.
That fight against Lawler didn't look that great. Just let him go out and do a celebrity boxing and make a bag over there. But the grind of this sport, and he doesn't have it anymore. I'd like to not see him being rebooked anymore, and let's just enjoy him for what he was. Jorge Masvidal wants an April UFC return. What's left for Masvidal? Who should he fight, guys? At one point he threw out McGregor. I don't think that's likely anymore, not just because of 2025, but what we just discussed for 20 minutes earlier. What are the names that remain out there, Mike Bond?
I mean, people will probably get annoyed, but if you're ever going to put this 3-piece in the soda storyline to bed, yes. Is there going to be any other time better to book him against Leon Edwards? Leon finally just did an interview today. Forgive me, I can't remember what the outlet was, but he hasn't really done anything since he lost the title to Bilal Muhammad. And I didn't see him throw out any names, but essentially just said his goal is to get the title back by the end of 25. But man, how forgotten has Leon Edwards been in the entire welterweight title picture? There was no one offering to throw him in for an interim title when Bilal fell out, and they're talking about Shavkat, all that stuff. But here we are. And I think if you're him, that's probably a very winnable fight for you, a big name to rebound. It could maybe headline the show in March, the fight night event happening over there in London, the scene of the crime. So it all feels like it's right there. Is it a competitive fight on paper with this version of Jorge Masvidal, who's lost, I think, 4 in a row in MMA and is on the wrong side of 40 or very close to it? Probably not, but that hasn't stopped the UFC from booking fights like this before. There's the storyline there. It'll sell tickets in London. So that to me feels like the layup standing right in front of you. But I don't know, like there's the London side, and then Masvidal seems to want to fight in a potential Miami card in April or so. So I don't know if that's going to come down to like a negotiation. If that ends up being the case, just throw him against whomever, some sort of striker maybe. But if you want to squeeze the most juice out of whatever is left in Jorge Masvidal, you got to do the Leon Edwards fight finally.
What are your thoughts, Nolan? You like what Mike says? You got another name for us?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the only one that has like anything significant outside of just being a fight for him. Like, you know, you can either throw him in a matchup to try to build somebody that's coming up. You can give him a top contender, which looking at them, I'm like, I don't know who of them I would feel like it would be kind of not an unfair fight, but there's not a lot of like, oh wow, that would be a really competitive, like interesting, I wonder who would win that one sort of thing.
Has Ferguson been booked, by the way?
That's another route. I would love the UFC to start doing that more. I think they were on a good streak there of kind of booking those really end of career guys against each other.
If you're not cutting them when you're going to use them, then I would be
okay with that. If they're going to, again, I feel like 2 years ago I was saying if they're going to book Tony again, I would be okay with that one. But yeah, I like Mike's idea. You know, if we're going for a rivalry fight, I think stylistically, it's not the worst thing in the world for Jorge, but I think it's a very extremely difficult fight, and I don't think he's going to win. He'd probably be a massive, massive underdog, but it's the most interesting option for sure.
Mike, you don't seem to agree?
No, I was just reading a comment. No, it is the most interesting option. He agreed with me, so of course I agree.
No, I wasn't sure if you meant it looked like you didn't like maybe the Ferguson possibility.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, anyone, you're gonna get me to scoff if you just mention Tony Ferguson's name in 2024, but it seems keeping him on the roster, so we'll see what ends up happening. But even Masvidal feels like a rough go for him. Dan, you got any ideas for Game Bread?
I don't even want to put it into the universe, but I think Tony Ferguson versus the only person I would want to see Vicente Luque fight is maybe Tony Ferguson. Just have two washed dudes who don't know what to do with each other that are just compromised go at it.
Washed in your mind, Dan? I don't think is it that bad for him?
Dude, did you see that fight against Buckley, man? Like that was Buckley, bad signs, man. That was bad signs.
More about Buckley, but anyways, go on.
And just to clean up a few things.
Nothing with Buckley, it's just the fact that he didn't get hit and went down and just kind of just gave up, which I don't like to say because it's very disrespectful. And I love Luque, but I'll real quick, just book Jorge because I'm not on the show very much. But one of the last times I was on the show, this very same question came up. I'm gonna keep the same answer, although I do like Mike Bond's answer. I will say Matt Brown, keep the old guys fighting the old guys, right? Just like the Cruz and Aldo, give him Matt Brown or something, and just Esther, get off the pot.
I like Miller versus Ferguson, Luque versus Masvidal. Although I do think Masvidal versus Edwards would be big, but man, that's I don't like the matchup for Jorge in that one. But it's interesting. Edwards hasn't been brought up. A guy that took out the great Kamaru Usman and ended his streak, then backed it up with winning a rematch. And yet he just hasn't gotten much love. He dominated Colby. Think about all the names that were brought up before someone even mentioned his name. Jack Della Maddalena was brought up by Bilal Muhammad. Shavkat and Ian Gary and Joaquin Buckley. Edwards just doesn't get a lot of love, but I think he needs to go out there and do some media, to keep his name out there. I think he does a poor job of it. One other thing I wanted to clean up, if anyone's trying to figure out where some of these fighters should be placed, we talk about Umar Nurmagomedov, the guys brought up, Islam Makhachev. I looked it up, and Ramadan in 2025 will be February 28th to March 29th. And remember, the events go as follows. The show that's in Sydney, UFC 312, that's on February 9th. So one could train and compete at that card. I don't know if someone could train and compete for UFC 313 on March 8th. Just saying. And I don't know when 314 is. That might be the Miami card that's been alluded to. It's been landing in April as of late. Even that one might be a tough squeeze. So if you're thinking about the Ankalaevs, Islam Makhachev, Nurmagomedov, just maybe that will help you guys out when you forecast. Last thing here, the guys over at PFL Mike, I think you put that one on the map. Corey Anderson, Patricio Pitbull, Frady, Patchy Mix, all frustrated because they can't get matchups. So PFL acquired Bellator. They were running some shows. They came out of the gate strong, champions versus champions. A few guys were defending, and then things have really fizzled in the second half of this year. What are we doing here, guys? I think the guys have a point. Nolan?
That's $1 million question is what are we doing? And I don't think anybody knows what they're doing. You know, there's been building discontent behind the scenes when it comes to PFL, when it comes to Bellator, when it comes to a lot of fighters that are put on ice. I mean, it's not just, you know, a hand select few or somebody's manager's disgruntled or whoever. Like we've seen now evidence from pretty consistently across the board from names that are big and small that the fighters aren't happy there. And I know in the old regime, in the old Bellator regime, things were far from perfect, right? There was a lot of shortcomings. There was, frustration. Some fighters felt like they weren't promoted enough. Some, felt like that there were some issues, right? But I think it was a lot of times more of a lack of resources, and the promotion did at times try to make things right and try to explain to them, try to at least communicate, right? Whereas now it seems like a lot of fighters don't necessarily know like when the end is in sight. They get fights booked, they are canceled. And Patricio Pitbull coming out, I talking to a lot of people behind the scenes, different teams and people in the industry. Like it seemed like, the biggest name in Bellator coming out and saying that did certainly make an impact in terms of like putting this problem on the map. No offense to Corey Anderson or Patchy Mix or Duke Rufus or anybody else that's spoken out about this. But I think that thread that came out yesterday, which was, if you look at the times that those tweets were tweeted, they were, this was a pretty big written pre-planned statement. It's almost, I think it's got over 1 million views on Twitter now. So for him, a guy that wouldn't even, like, if you were like, man, one day down the line, if you want to go to the UFC, would you? No, this is the place I want to build Bellator. I want to be a part of this. This is where, I want to show people that MMA is a sport. It's not an organization. Like he would never even say anything that would be misconstrued as being remotely negative, and he would try to turn it into building up his brand. So for him to come out, him and his people to put out that statement, I think does speak volumes to this. And it's not a good look for PFL, and this morning, to one of his points, their tweet was about some rapper that they're going to have perform at the event on Friday. So obviously that's something that was planned probably before his statement came out, but not a great look either. So I really hope they can get things together. I think for the industry, there's a lot of people that are concerned that fighters being disgruntled and not getting fights is damning for the long-term future and just having competition in the space. So it's an unfortunate situation. I hope there's some clarity soon. I hope that they announce a bunch of events for next year and we get some of these guys that are super talented too. Patchy Mix is in his prime. Corey Anderson has looked great, since he left the UFC. So I just want to see these guys back. And I hope that the communication can be better. I think that's something that should probably be easy for people to fix.
Those are two of the best across any organization, because Anderson had some great success in the UFC over some big names, some guys that wore gold. And Mix, I'm convinced, is definitely one of the top bantamweights in the world, and it's just kind of wasting away. And then you think of AJ McKee, Usman Nurmagomedov. I mean, I don't know like what's going to happen here, but we do get more press releases about executives that they sign than fight bookings. Let's see here. And Shul Jubilee's gas station says fighters have some complaints about ONE FC, and the reason I'm bringing that up is because yes, what's happening here, what's happening at ONE FC, man. This is going to be a two-man show with PFL and Bellator, but PFL I feel like is just dropping the ball. Zach Jackson's going maybe a little far. He says PFL is going bankrupt within 6 months. Mike, what are your thoughts on this one, man? Those are some really good fighters and that aren't just flatly aren't being used. And I'm not so sure they're excited about being part of a regular season format, although PFL is yet to commit to what 2025 is going to look like.
Yeah, it's tough. This is not the press you want on your championship event week by any stretch of the imagination. I appreciate and respect the unity that we saw of these three champions, right? Like, as Nolan mentioned, Patricio Pitbull, the fighter with the most fights, wins, and title fight victories in the history of the Bellator brand, coming out with that type of statement on the back of fellow champions saying something. It's like, was the point, you couldn't ignore it, had to put a story together, and then you're kind of digging through the history and seeing the other complaints. And it's been pretty much a year, almost to the day, since the official purchase of the Bellator brand was announced, and it hasn't been a great run. I mean, there's a lot of frustration. I think a lot of the fears of people in the industry, from fighters to managers to more, are starting to kind of be realized in this moment. So they're really going to have to do something to turn it around. You have Don Davis out there saying he's not even that big of a fan of MMA in those interviews recently, which I think rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. So I don't know. It just seems like there's constant missteps, and this isn't just guys on the bottom of the roster who you can't tack on to give some fights. These are, I imagine, the names and the athletes that were part of the backbone of your desire to purchase this organization, and now you have them disgruntled and not wanting to take fights, or not wanting to be offered fights, all these different things. So I don't know. It's a tough time when you go into the year promising 8 events with 2 title fights on the meach, and you deliver 5 and only 1 had 2 title fights on it. You're just serving up many reasons to be criticized. So a quick plug, because I know we're slowly wrapping up on time here. Nolan and I will talk about this more at length tomorrow on the bonfire, so tune in for that.
There you go. Mike's been dropping them episodes there. His new podcast, YouTube channel. It's both, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So check it out. The bonfire. All right, guys, you're right. We're running a little short on time, but I guess this is just a way to pivot to what's happening this week. There are no UFC fights, but PFL has their finals on Black Friday. It's the day after Thanksgiving here in the United States. I don't know what you call it around the world. It's just, I guess, November 29th. But remember the early start time, because they are in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Now, Nolan, maybe you can bail me out here, but I think you said 1 p.m. Eastern for the main card, and that's 10 a.m. Pacific. And then there's some PFL MENA championships going on. But then you're saying that the whole thing starts at 7:15 a.m. Eastern?
7:15 a.m. with kind of the traditional sort of showcase prelims, right? Like some names that we know of from the Bellator and PFL roster. I'm looking at it now. You got like Alfie Davis and Mansour Barnawi on there, and Jeremy Kennedy and some others. And then at 9:30, it goes to the PFL MENA, which, as Mike pointed out before we went on the air, is 4 title fights. So that's in an amateur fight. So that's a significant amount of time. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 title fights. Main card starts at 1. So it's going to be a long day for those of us that are working. I know I'll be one of those on as well. So
it'll take less time to cook your turkey on Thanksgiving than it will.
Yeah.
Hey, don't forget though, you'll get plenty of filler breaks, right, guys, with the PFL broadcast. By the way, what's better filler? PFL randomly like doing military inaugurations, like swearing people in between fights, or UFC going to Macau and at 5 a.m. rolling out a Stipe tribute from like the week before that they could have used, or maybe even before the fight, maybe give Stipe a little more promotion. They give him his grand send off in Macau. What's a better filler, guys?
Yeah. Crazy stuff, man. Hey, we got to sprint to the finish line here. What's the fight, I guess, that maybe intrigues you the most at PFL? It is their finals. 6 fighters will be champions and millionaires in 6 different divisions, not bantamweight, not middleweight, and the women are doing flyweight this year. Go ahead, Nolan. Just give me a quick button up on PFL, this event. Any thoughts you have?
Yeah, Dakota Dacheva versus Talia Santos is the one. I think she's arguably their biggest, she's probably their biggest homegrown star at this point. And she has the ability here to really confirm herself as an excellent elite fighter as well. This is her first, in her critics' eyes, they would say this is her first test fighting a former UFC title challenger who, outside of a loss to Valentina Shevchenko, who's looked pretty damn good in her career. So big fan of that one. And then, I don't know if anybody else has a different choice, but I can keep rolling. But one other guy I was going to mention was Shamil Musayev. I think he's been, in terms of excitement factor this year, has been awesome. I didn't know much about him before this year, and he's just put on significantly violent, entertaining performances with finishes. So PFL can certainly use all of that they can get.
He's the guy that kind of looked more like a regular Joe Schmo, not the mean looking guy on the left. All right. And Dan Tom, how about you, man? PFL, just share your thoughts. What's a fight you're looking forward to as we wrap up the show here?
I'll just shout out Brendan Loughnane also was training out in Bangtown Muay Thai, another fighter that's been finding some success and kind of a new wind to his career. But he's facing a guy named Timur Khizriev, who is on one of the prospect columns that I did for Junkie. So I'm really interested. Of course, he's a undefeated Russian fighter at 17-0. Still taking a big test here, in my opinion, against Brendan. So I'm looking forward to that fight.
No, he was telling us, Brendan was telling us, hey, man, they've thrown a lot of these guys at me. I stop a lot of takedowns. So he's not worried one bit. How about you, Mike Bond? Your thoughts on PFL? Anything you want to discuss? I know we have to rush through this, but whatever you want to cover, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think Dakota Dacheva is the one here, right? I think it would be very, very, very good for PFL if this fight goes well for her. If she goes out there and gets held down for 5 rounds and we see she has no ground game or something, I think that's going to be real deflating to a lot of the momentum that they built behind her. So yeah, like that would be, they just need her to have an amazing highlight. And I think it would be perfect upside for the whole show. Doesn't really matter what else happens. But I guess if we're talking about, PFL, this is the company where, you win your fights and you get the next opportunity and all that stuff. In theory, Denis Goltsov versus Oleg Popov should produce Francis Ngannou's next opponent. I don't know if that's actually going to be the case or what they're going to do. But, when I was there in Saudi Arabia where this fight is happening, when Ngannou fought, there was some chatter. This could potentially be, the next opponent. In theory, it would be kind of the same road Renan Ferreira took. So we'll see if they end up going that direction. With one fight left on Francis Ngannou's contract, I imagine this would not be plan A, but at least you have a plan C or D or E or however far down you have to go to the chain.
Got it. All right. So on the way out, let's do this. I want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy the 4-day weekend for those of you that, are celebrate Thanksgiving around the world. And I say that because there's a lot of expats everywhere in every country.
Thanksgiving was last month here in Canada, bro.
Oh, my bad. All right. And then also, we talked about the Bonfire Overreaction is a new show as well here on MMA Junkie. You can catch our managing editor, Simon Samana. We'll be talking to the Goes tomorrow, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. So we do noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific every Monday here live. They do it on Tuesday. Check it out. New show. Give them some love. And again, the best way you can do that is like and subscribe. That's all you got to do. It's free, and then we'll handle the rest. Nolan, if we don't see you, good luck at the World MMA Awards. You were recently nominated for Best Journalist. And then it's good to have you back, Dan Tom. We look forward to your pieces every week. Can't go out there gambling if you ain't got the info, and Dan Tom does a great job of breaking it down. And lastly, the PFL times again. It starts early, 7:15, 7:30, whatever that was, Eastern, and then 4:15, 4:30 Pacific for the prelims. So if you're just worried about the millionaires, the possible millionaires and the titles, it's 1 p.m. Eastern and 10 a.m. Pacific. And I'll close with this. This is for the guys. This was a nice comment from UFC Uzmak. I'm behind in the stream, but the conversation you all had surrounding Conor is one of the reasons I love this show every Monday. Appreciate the non-bias and honesty on serious issues. So bravo, guys. You guys did a great job. As always, you might be my favorite panel. Don't tell the other guys I said that. We're out of here. Talk to you next Monday. Go out and be a champion.